In the quiet town of Brookhaven, a small suburban community, where everyone knew each other's business, an illicit affair led to a tragic murder that shocked the entire town. It started with a secret relationship between 42-year-old Clara Ellington and her cousin's 19-year-old son, Josh Reese. What began as a fleeting moment of passion spiraled into obsession, jealousy, and ultimately a brutal crime that left no one unscathed. Clara Ellington had lived in Brookhaven her whole life, a quiet town where little seemed to change. Born into a family known for its traditional values, Clara grew up with a strong sense of duty. She married her high school sweetheart, Tom Ellington, at the age of 22. Their life was seemingly perfect. Tom provided well for the family as a successful contractor, and Clara dedicated herself to being the ideal wife and mother to their two children. From the outside, their suburban home painted a picture of blissful domesticity. But over the years, the reality behind closed doors told a different story. By 2013, Clara found herself lost in the monotony of her life. Tom had become increasingly absorbed in his work, often traveling for days at a time, leaving Clara to manage everything at home. Their marriage had grown stale, with intimacy becoming a distant memory, replaced by routine conversations about bills and schedules. Clara felt invisible in her own life, yearning for something, anything, to make her feel alive again. It was during this time that Josh Reese, Clara's cousin's 19-year-old son, entered the picture. Josh had a troubled past. He had spent time in juvenile detention after a series of bad decisions, and had recently moved to Brookhaven to stay with his aunt and uncle, hoping for a fresh start. He was enrolled in a local high school to finish his education, but the rebellious streak that had led him astray still lingered. His family saw him as a burden, someone who needed structure and discipline. But Clara saw something different. Josh was a tall, brooding figure with a wildness in his eyes that unsettled most people. His reputation as a troublemaker made others wary, but Clara was inexplicably drawn to him. There was something about his rough edges, the danger that radiated from him, that woke something dormant inside her. She told herself it was harmless, that the attraction was fleeting. But as the months passed, Clara found herself seeking out his company more and more. It all began innocently enough during a family gathering in late summer 2013. Clara had wandered outside for some fresh air, feeling suffocated by the noise and chatter inside. Josh had been there too, sitting on the porch steps, lost in his own thoughts. Without intending to, they found themselves in quiet conversation, exchanging words that, to anyone listening, would have seemed perfectly mundane. But underneath the surface, there was a current of tension. Clara found herself captivated by the way Josh spoke about his frustrations, his anger at feeling misunderstood by his family, his desire for freedom. She listened intently, drawn in by his intensity, as if she were discovering a kindred spirit. In that moment, something shifted between them. It was subtle, but undeniable. That evening, as the gathering continued inside, a stolen glance turned into something far more dangerous. There were no grand declarations, no confessions, just an unspoken understanding. By late September 2013, what had started as a fleeting moment turned into a full-blown affair. The secrecy only fueled the passion between them. For Josh, it was intoxicating to seduce an older woman, someone who represented everything stable and secure that he had never known. For Clara, the affair was a reprieve from the monotony of her life. It made her feel alive in a way she hadn't in years. She felt reckless, dangerous, like the rules that had governed her life no longer applied. As the weeks passed, their encounters became more frequent and more intense. Clara would find excuses to slip away from her responsibilities, to meet Josh in secret. They'd drive out to the outskirts of town, to places where no one would recognize them. In those moments, Clara forgot who she was: a wife, a mother, someone bound by obligations. In those moments, she was free. But freedom came at a cost. By November 2013, the affair had begun to take its toll on Clara's emotional state. She felt constantly on edge, terrified of being caught, yet unable to stop. She became more distant from Tom, who, ever absorbed in his work, failed to notice the changes in his wife. Clara's children, too, began to sense that something was off. Clara, who had always been attentive, seemed distracted, her mind elsewhere. She would sit through family dinners, barely engaging, her thoughts consumed by Josh. Meanwhile, Josh's behavior grew more erratic. What had begun as an exciting game of seduction quickly turned into something darker. He became possessive, demanding more of Clara's time, growing jealous of her life outside their secret world. He would call her late at night, sometimes just to hear her voice, other times to vent his frustrations. Clara began to see flashes of the temper that had landed him in trouble before. But even as Josh's obsession deepened, Clara couldn't bring herself to end the affair. By early 2014, Clara was trapped. She had grown dependent on the affair, on the excitement and danger it brought. It had filled a void in her life, but now that void was consuming her. She knew what they were doing was wrong. She knew the risk of losing everything: her family, her reputation, her security. But each time she thought of walking away, the fear of returning to her mundane, colorless life paralyzed her. As the affair continued into the summer of 2014, Clara's sense of control slipped further. Josh's possessiveness turned to anger whenever Clara couldn't meet him. He would accuse her of not caring for him, of using him for her own needs. Their once passionate encounters became tense, filled with arguments that left Clara shaken. Josh wanted more. He wanted Clara to leave her husband, to run away with him. But Clara knew that was impossible. And yet, she couldn't let go. The more Josh demanded, the more reckless Clara became. She would lie to Tom about her whereabouts, make up stories to justify her absences. She even started taking risks, inviting Josh to the house when she knew Tom would be away. Each time, she promised herself it would be the last. But each time, she went back. The emotional toll of the affair began to unravel Clara's life, and by September 2014, the cracks were showing. Her marriage to Tom, already fragile, was on the verge of collapse. Josh, too, was reaching a breaking point. He had lost the control he once had over Clara, and the fear of losing her consumed him. As the days grew shorter and the year edged towards its end, Clara knew it was only a matter of time before something gave way. What had begun as an escape from the mundane had turned into a nightmare, from which there seemed to be no escape. By the middle of 2014, Clara's once well-structured life was unraveling rapidly. Her affair with Josh, which had started as an escape from her mundane marriage, was becoming something darker. Clara had initially told herself that she could keep her two worlds separate, her life as a wife and mother, and the secret life she lived with Josh. But the lines were blurring, and the pressure was becoming unbearable. Clara found herself making excuses more frequently to see Josh. She would slip away from her responsibilities, feigning errands or visits to friends, when in reality she was meeting Josh in hidden places, far from prying eyes. Each time Clara promised herself it would be the last. Each time she gave in again. What had once felt exhilarating now filled her with a sense of dread. She knew it was only a matter of time before something went terribly wrong. Josh, too, had changed. The thrill of the affair had given way to a growing obsession. He became angry when Clara couldn't see him, accusing her of not caring for him, of using him to fill the void in her life. His moods became unpredictable, swinging from intense passion to fits of rage. Clara tried to reason with him, but Josh's mind was set. He wanted more from her. He wanted her to leave her husband and her family, to be with him fully. But Clara knew she could never do that. The affair had always been a fantasy, a dangerous one, but a fantasy nonetheless. The reality of abandoning her children, her home, her life, was something she could never face. By the fall of 2014, Josh's threats to expose their affair became more frequent. He would call her late at night, telling her that if she didn't leave her husband, he would tell everyone. Each time, Clara managed to calm him down, to reassure him that she still cared for him. But it was becoming harder. She was no longer in control. Josh's obsession was driving him to desperation, and Clara felt trapped in a situation she had no idea how to escape. Things took a turn for the worse on February 17th, 2015. It was a chilly evening, and Clara had sent her children off to stay with her mother for the night, while her husband Tom was out of town on business. She had planned to spend the evening alone, hoping for some peace. But Josh had other plans. Without warning, Josh showed up at Clara's house. He had been drinking, his eyes wild with anger and desperation. He stormed into the house, demanding that Clara leave with him immediately. He was done with the secrecy, done with being hidden away, like a shameful secret. He wanted her to leave her family, to run away with him, and start a new life together. Clara, frightened by his intensity, tried to reason with him. She told him that it wasn't possible, that she couldn't just abandon her life. The conversation quickly spiraled out of control. Josh grew angrier, accusing Clara of lying to him, of stringing him along. His words became harsh, cutting deep into Clara's already fragile emotions. She tried to calm him, but nothing worked. The situation escalated, and Clara found herself backing away as Josh's anger turned to violence. In a moment of blind rage, Josh snapped. He lunged towards the kitchen, grabbing a knife from the counter. Before Clara could react, Josh had stabbed her, once, then again, and again. The attack was brutal and swift, blood splattering across the tiled floor as Clara collapsed. Her body hit the ground hard, the life draining from her as she looked up at Josh, her mind swirling with disbelief and regret. Josh stood over her, panting, the knife still clutched in his hand, covered in blood. For a moment, time seemed to stop. The horror of what he had done washed over him, but it was too late. Clara lay lifeless on the floor, her blood pooling around her. The house, once filled with warmth and life, was now a crime scene. Josh, in shock, dropped the knife and fled. He stumbled out of the house, leaving Clara's body behind, leaving the life they had shared, however briefly, behind. He ran, not knowing where to go, only knowing that he needed to escape what he had done. The next morning, February 18th, 2015, Clara's husband, Tom, returned home. He had been away on a business trip and was expecting to find his wife waiting for him, as she always did. Instead, he walked into a scene that would haunt him for the rest of his life. The house was eerily quiet, and as he stepped into the kitchen, the sight of Clara's lifeless body greeted him. Tom froze, his heart racing, his mind unable to process what he was seeing. Clara lay on the floor, her body surrounded by blood, her eyes still open in death. The knife, covered in dried blood, lay a few feet away. In that moment, everything Tom knew shattered. He immediately called the police, his voice shaking as he reported what he had found. Detectives arrived at the scene within the hour. It was a chaotic scene, neighbors gathering outside, shocked by the sight of police cars lining the quiet street. The detectives quickly took over, their first task to piece together what had happened. As they combed through the house, it became clear that this was no random act of violence. There were no signs of a break-in, no evidence of robbery. The attack had been personal. Clara's phone was found on the kitchen counter, and it didn't take long for detectives to uncover a series of text messages between her and Josh. The messages painted a picture of an illicit relationship, one filled with passion, jealousy, and ultimately, violence. By February 20th, 2015, Josh was brought in for questioning. He had been staying with his aunt and uncle, trying to act as though nothing had happened, but the detectives saw through his facade. During the interrogation, Josh denied everything. He claimed he had no knowledge of Clara's murder, that he had been home that night. But his story didn't hold up. His erratic behavior, the way he fidgeted and avoided eye contact, made the detectives suspicious. A breakthrough came when the detectives searched Josh's room. Hidden beneath his mattress, they found a journal, a disturbing collection of writings that revealed the depth of Josh's obsession with Clara. Page after page, Josh had written about his love for her, his anger at her refusal to leave her husband, and his growing desperation. The journal was the key piece of evidence that tied him to the murder. By March 6, 2015, the police had gathered enough evidence to arrest Josh. The journal, combined with the text messages and the timeline of events, made it clear that Josh had been the one to kill Clara in a fit of jealous rage. The trial, which took place in May 2015, was a spectacle for the town of Brookhaven. The sordid details of Clara's affair with Josh were laid bare for all to see. Family and friends testified, revealing the darker sides of both Clara and Josh. The community, which had once seen Clara as a devoted wife and mother, was shocked by the revelations. Josh tried to paint the affair as something mutual, something born out of love. But the jury saw through his lies. The evidence was overwhelming. After weeks of testimony, Josh was convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. By May 2015, the trial of Josh Reese had come to a close. The courtroom had been filled with the quiet murmurs of the townspeople, all of them eager to witness the final outcome of a case that had captivated Brookhaven for months. When the verdict was read, guilty of second-degree murder, there was a collective sigh of relief, but it was a hollow victory for those closest to Clara Ellington. The tragedy of her death had left wounds that no verdict could heal. Josh sat emotionless as the sentence was passed, life in prison. His once fiery, defiant spirit seemed to fade as the reality of his fate settled in. The affair that had started as an exciting, dangerous escape had now ended with him losing everything. The court had painted him as a disturbed young man, one whose obsession with Clara had led him to a violent act he could never take back. And as he was led away in handcuffs, the weight of his actions finally sank in. His life, full of potential and possibility, was over. For Clara's husband, Tom Ellington, the aftermath of the trial was far more painful than the months of hearings and revelations. He had sat in the courtroom day after day, listening to the sordid details of his wife's betrayal, her secret affair, and her brutal murder. The Clara he had known, or thought he had known, was not the woman who had lived a secret life with his cousin's son. Tom's grief was complicated by the intense feelings of betrayal and anger that consumed him. The wife he had loved, who had raised their children and stood by his side, had been living a double life for over a year. And now she was gone, murdered by the young man she had chosen over her family. Tom found it impossible to move on. Each day, he returned to the same house where the memories of Clara's life and death still lingered. He couldn't escape the image of her lifeless body on the kitchen floor, surrounded by blood. The home that had once been a place of warmth and safety now felt haunted, not just by Clara's absence, but by the secrets she had kept. In the months following the trial, Tom tried to continue with his life. He returned to work, hoping that staying busy would dull the pain. But each day felt like a struggle. He no longer knew who he was without Clara by his side. The routine of marriage had been dull and predictable, but now he longed for that predictability. He longed for the moments they had shared, however distant they had become. But more than anything, he was haunted by the question of why. Why had Clara strayed? Why had she chosen Josh? And why hadn't she stopped the affair before it led to her death? Clara's two children, Ellie and Jake, were left to grapple with a legacy that was far more complex than they could understand. They were still young. Ellie was 12, and Jake had just turned 9 when their mother was killed. For them, the trial and the aftermath were confusing, filled with emotions they couldn't fully express. Their mother, who had been the center of their world, was suddenly gone. But worse than that, they now knew that she had been involved in something dark and secretive. In the months after Clara's death, Ellie struggled to make sense of the conflicting emotions she felt. She remembered her mother as someone loving and kind, but now those memories were tainted by what she had learned during the trial. The whispers around town, the gossip that spread like wildfire, didn't make it any easier. At school, she could feel the eyes of her classmates on her, their judgment palpable. They knew her mother had been murdered, but they also knew the scandalous details that had led to it. Jake, too young to fully understand the complexities of the situation, retreated into silence. He missed his mother, and that pain was simple. He couldn't grasp why things had changed so suddenly, or why his father was always so distant now. The house was quieter, colder, and the feeling of family that had once been there was gone. The town of Brookhaven was forever changed by Clara's death. What had started as a shocking murder became a story of obsession and betrayal, one that left the town reeling. The trial had unearthed a hidden darkness in their seemingly perfect community, and now Brookhaven was left to pick up the pieces. The scandal was the talk of the town for months, and even after the trial ended, the echoes of Clara's secret life lingered in conversations whispered behind closed doors. Neighbors who had once admired Clara now spoke of her with a mix of pity and disdain. They couldn't reconcile the image of the devoted wife and mother with the woman who had engaged in an affair with a troubled young man. And yet, in the quiet moments when the gossip died down, there was a sense of unease that spread through Brookhaven. If Clara could have kept such a devastating secret, what other secrets were being hidden behind the closed doors of their seemingly perfect community? Though the trial had ended and Josh was behind bars, the story of Clara's affair and Josh's obsession left an unsettling question for everyone involved. Could such a tragic ending have been avoided if either of them had walked away sooner? If Clara had stopped the affair before it spiraled out of control, or if Josh had let go of his obsession, perhaps none of this would have happened. But those questions could never be answered, and that uncertainty lingered. In the quiet moments when Tom sat alone in the house where his wife had died, or when Ellie and Jake tried to piece together their fractured memories of their mother, the same question haunted them. How had it all gone so wrong? And in Brookhaven, where life seemed to have returned to normal, the townspeople couldn't shake the feeling that this tragedy was not as isolated as they wanted to believe. In a town full of secrets, Clara's death had been a wake-up call. But how many other secrets were still hidden beneath the surface? The tragic end to Clara's life left a mark on everyone she had touched. And while time moved on, the questions, the regrets, and the sadness remained. This actually gives off the same vibe as the case where the wife's secret affair with her cousin's husband, which ends in murder. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss out on our daily updates. Also, make sure you watch that video. Thank you.